All right, folks, California's first in the nation statewide task force on reparations voted to limit state compensation in the event it's awarded to the descendants of free and enslaved black people in the United States in the 19th century. This decision rejects the proposal to include all black people who would receive reparations. Kamilah Moore, she is the California Reparations Task Force Chair. She joins us from Los Angeles to explain this decision. Kamilah, glad to have you here. First and foremost, there was a lot of people who talked on this issue. Dr. Greg Carr was one of the folks who participated in this hearing. How many folks did y'all count who actually testified in this matter on Tuesday?
11 people testified. So 6 of those 11 people were certified genealogists. 2 were Greg Carr and Jessica Ann Ayuar, and the other 3 were Marcus Champion, who's a grassroots organizer in California and worked on AB 3121 before it was enacted. Mike Davis, who's a former assembly member in the state of California and advocated for a lineage standard. And then lastly, Kevin Brown, who is an Evanston resident and spoke against a bit about what's going on with the reparations program in Evanston. So the vote ended up being 5-4.
So, I mean, obviously that's a very close vote. What was the issue? Why was it so contentious?
Great question. So the community of eligibility discussion and debate has been kind of looming over the 9-member task force since we first started meeting as early as June of 2021. So we've been having a 10-month debate around eligibility. And the crux of the issue is, or was, should the eligibility standard be defined by a race-based standard? So as you said in your introduction, all Black Californians being eligible for compensation for reparations for the institution of slavery, or should it be based on a lineage standard where if you can trace your ancestry to what we decided on, an African-American descendant of a chatteled enslaved person or the descendant of a free Black person living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century, then you would be eligible. And so ultimately 5 people on the task force voted for the lineage-based standard and 4 voted for a race-based standard.
So based upon that, if somebody Black came to the United States in 1899, they make the cut. If they came in 1900, they don't make the cut.
Potentially. We still have to work all those details out, but that's what it says.
So now here's the issue. How then are you going to prove it? How will people be able to trace it? Because what we know is you don't necessarily have clearly defined records for people to be able to search their lineage. So how are you going to do it?
So that's a really great question. But first, before I answer that question, I think that oftentimes people don't ask the same question about how do you prove your Blackness, right? And how do you measure Blackness? How do you prove it? So what's to stop someone like a Rachel Dolezal or Mindy Kaling's brother, who's of Indian descent, who actually wrote a book about how he pretended to be Black to get into medical school? How do you determine who's Black, and why would we be comfortable with the state making those particular determinations? But to answer your question about lineage tracing, when you talk about international law and reparations under international law, one of those tenets is restitution. How do you make a person whole after the state has harmed you? And so the state has a responsibility. If they've broken part of your lineage or your history, they have the duty and the responsibility to repair that. So what does that look like practically? That could look like the state subpoenaing the Mormon Church for records, and assisting people for free for lineage tracing and things like that. So there's no burden or financial cost for anyone who may be eligible.
So let's actually deal with that. If that is the standard, I mean, so what is it? DNA? I mean, exactly what is it? So what then happens? Could you potentially have white folks saying, "I've got Black lineage, I qualify"?
That potentially could happen, but I want people to be clear that that same scenario could be happening under a race-based standard because race is a self-selecting category. Anyone can pick or select Black or African American on the census records. And there's an example of that. For instance, Native Americans are going through this right now, where there's, as we know, not many Native Americans in this country, but in the 2020 census, they were overcounted because other people who are not really Native American are clicking or checking Native American on the box. So it's a really complex issue.
Obviously he is. And first of all, you got a variety of things going here. The state still has to decide if they're actually going to do this. And so you're laying out a standard here. But I do want to ask this. This is very interesting. So if we're talking about lineage, if we're using slavery, California didn't become a state until 1850. California wasn't a state for very long before slavery ended. And so you realistically could have more Black people who suffered under Jim Crow in California for longer than the number of Black people who were actually in California before 1900.
Right, but another thing, and this will come out during our process, we've hired some communication firms to create a public education campaign because there's a lot of misunderstandings, and I wouldn't say misinformation, but just misunderstandings about the role of California and their complicity in slavery. Yes, they were admitted into the Union in 1850, but they did allow slavery in the state of California. There's people like Robert Perkins, who was brought by his white slave owner to California during the gold rush as a slave. And there's many other people who were in that particular situation. But then also, 2 years after the state of California was admitted to the Union, they enacted a Fugitive Slave Act. So in the event that, free Black people escaped to California expecting freedom, when that statute was enacted, that, was one of the many ways that California was complicit in maintaining slavery, because if you were caught after that statute was enacted, you would be deported back to the southern states to be a slave.
Greg Carr, you spoke before the committee. Share with people what was your perspective on this, and where did you side on the 5-4? Were you with the 5 or with the 4?
I had to agree with Dean Chemerinsky, who testified last month. And thank you for joining us, Sister Moore, Chair Moore. You have an impossible task, of course. And I said as much. And I think that I echo everything Dean Chemerinsky said. If it's between race and lineage, of course you have to pick lineage as a matter of law. We know that. Even though we know the legal challenge is going to say that lineage is a proxy for race, and they're going to be right back where we started from. Chemerinsky said that too. I mean, he said it's under-inclusive from jump. We're not going to be able to document everybody, even with all the resources. He said that he believes that everybody should benefit, but he's thinking about what will be ultimately upheld by the courts. And we know it's going to be strict scrutiny and narrow taste. So I guess my question, and by the way, Roland, just to answer your question, and in that short period of time, and I agree, I was horribly miscast. I would have much rather been on the legal side trying to work through that rather than get to the point where it's an impossible choice between race and lineage, which we know legally is probably going to be about the same thing. That's what the Native Americans may find out. And plus, none of it allows us to remedy past discrimination, as he walked through with Croson and so forth, and the affirmative cases. My question, Madam Chair, is how can we help people understand two things? Number one, that Pan-Africanism is not opposed to local reparations. Your presentation, which I thought was excellent yesterday with Paul Robeson and S.E. Robeson and William Thompson, these are Black internationalists. They are Pan-Africanists in an international forum the United States doesn't recognize. How can we help people understand that these things work together? And then the second thing, finally, is, and help me with this, because you have an impossible task. You really do. How can we imagine beyond the constrictures that Dean Chemerinsky laid out? Because the piece that he didn't articulate is the failure of political imagination that can help us think beyond these straitjackets that we think are permanent, when in fact they're just imposed by the same judges that we just saw that Florida judge thumb his nose at, because we can read the Constitution too and interpret it differently, especially since after 1965 or so, they have narrowed something that isn't in the plain language of the Constitution. How can we have a larger imagination for these reparation solutions in your mind? And how can we help people stop having this like it's a fight between Pan-Africanism and
That's two great points and questions. I think the first point, I agree. And I think I said as much in my presentation. Pan-Africanism and local reparations or lineage-based reparations are not, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be a Pan-Africanist and be pro-local or lineage-based reparations. And I brought up Queen Mother Audley Moore as a historical example of that. She was a self-professed Pan-Africanist, but she also coined the term Descendants of American Slavery. She had an organization that she founded in California called, United States Citizens of Slave Descendants, right? And so she is a perfect or prime example of how you can hold, solidarity with, all African people or people of African descent and all oppressed groups, really, while also maintaining the sacred political project that is reparation for the institution of slavery in these United States. In terms of political imagination, I do agree with you to a certain extent. And, there's so much that I could probably say about that. I don't have enough time to really elaborate, but I'm all for, just connecting the dots. Particularly, there's Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Let's connect. Let's connect with CARICOM. Let's connect with African Union. Let's all connect.
Yes.
Because I do believe in Black internationalism as well.
Yes.
Reese?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is a critical point. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Reese?
I'm just curious to hear, because, it seems like how you determine eligibility of a specific artifacts or whatever documentation that's going to be required hasn't been determined yet. Is there any consideration of maybe reexamining the eligibility if it becomes clear that it's going to narrow the pool so narrowly that reparations just essentially becomes a rhetorical victory as opposed to real restoration being implemented in the state of California?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a 9-member task force, and at any point where we want to reevaluate, we definitely could do that. Mm-hmm.
Larry?
Yeah, Chairperson Moore, thank you for all your work and everything you're doing. And I want to connect, two issues that I think are important. So I know the state made the decision about returning Beachland, Manhattan Beach, into a Black family, historically been taken away. And now the reparations, importance of reparations, now you leading the committee. Can you talk about what's happening in the state of California at the grassroots level? Because we aren't seeing a lot of this in other states. Because I think that question is important in terms of utilizing what's happening in the state of California as a template for other Black folks in other states.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing up the Bruce Beach example. So, for instance, the Bruce family, they had historic beachfront property, a hotel front in Manhattan Beach, California, but it was taken away by the state via eminent domain. And so the descendants of the Bruces, and I believe they used genealogical evidence to prove that, they were able to work with LA County to get their property restored. And so, yeah, now they are the rightful owners again of that particular property. But in terms of your question about grassroots activists, so I'll just name some organizations. So there's a Coalition for a Just and Equitable California that's led by Chris Lotson and Tiffany Quarles and Kim Mims and some other people who have worked on AB 3121 since it was just a bill with Secretary Weber, along with the National Assembly for American Slavery Descendants, led by people like Chad Brown, Friday Jones, Marcus Champion, Lori, there's so many people. And yeah, they've been working in concert for over 2 years to get bills passed through the legislature like AB 3121, which created the task force. And then also what's coming along the pipe from them is AB 1604, which just passed the Judiciary Committee in California. And that would require ethnic data disaggregation amongst African or Black racial groups, particularly for state boards and commissions. But I think the idea is to extrapolate that and broaden it out for the entire state of California, similar to what Asian American Pacific Islander communities have done, particularly in New York and other states, to push for data disaggregation, because there's an understanding as the society becomes more multicultural, we all share similar problems, but we also have distinct needs. And if that data isn't shown or reflected, people are rendered invisible and they can't really get the particular and tailored needs that they want. And so, yeah, there's people on the grassroots fighting for reparations and data disaggregation every single day.
All right, then. Well, look, we certainly appreciate your work. There's a whole lot more to do. Thank you for explaining that. And you're right, having the right information is kind of important. A lot of people get really emotional and folk don't read. And so our goal is to be able to make sure they have correct information from various folks. Kamilah Moore, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Hey, folks, welcome back. Patrol Grooming, of course, is a men's grooming company that delivers on this promise every day to men everywhere. Everything we do, every product we make is designed to help you to present your best self. Now, y'all see me. I'm sitting here wearing a suit today, but clean shaven. This is the video from this morning as I was using Patrol Grooming's products. You can actually see it right there. Folks, it's a promise they have kept since 1991 when they first introduced the Bump Control brand, the #1 men's product for a smooth, bump-free shave and silky skin. Millions of customers count on their exceptional skincare products, which can be found at more than 30,000 retail stores in more than 50 countries around the world. Now you can have exceptional beard and skincare products that are as unique as you are. Brothers, as we prepare to head back out into the world as COVID restrictions are being lifted, it's time to be smooth and clean. Y'all know how we do. That shaggy look, it got to go. Visit www.patrolgrooming.com to order a Patrol Grooming box and use this discount code, #Roland30, #ROLAND30 for a 30% discount at checkout. And we certainly appreciate Patrol Grooming being a partner with us here at Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?